George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We've got L. Michelle Smith, and she's got one question for you. Are you ready to say yes? Are you ready to say yes? Right? And here's why. Because as women of color in particular, you don't always feel like you're ready, or the organizations that you represent don't always think you're ready to do what they need you to do. Something like that. Well, anyway, we've got a sister here who says, I've got some tools, I've got some coaching, I've got some affirmations, I got some stuff that if you apply, they will have to say yes. Here we go. The book is called 7 Ways to Say I'm Entitled to the C-Suite. Secrets of women of color need to know to find they're happy and thrive in an exclusive corporate culture. Award-winning author, sought-after keynote speaker, and certified executive and personal coach, L. Michelle Smith is here.
Hey, George.
Say yes.
Yes, it's so good to be back. Thanks for having me.
We're so happy to have you back. And on the day that we're talking, it's a big day.
It's a big day.
The country's about to say yes.
Yes, the world. It's in retail around the world. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited for you. So let's talk about, first of all, you do something called evidence-based coaching. I want to understand more about what that means.
Okay. Glad you asked. I am a credentialed executive and personal coach. That means that I have gotten certified by an organization that is accredited by one of the foremost, if not the authority in coaching, and that's the International Coaching Federation. Where I got my training is the CAP Institute, and that stands for Coaching and Applied Positive Psychology. So part of the evidence base that I am trained in is positive psychology. As coaches, credential coaches, we are challenged, in fact, expected to continue our coach education. It never stops. So a part of my coach education has been neuroscience. So the strategies, the insights that I share, they are culturally nuanced, of course, gender specific, of course, but they are grounded in evidence-based, meaning science-based strategies.
I love the idea of science-based strategies. So I guess another way to put it, this ain't just some stuff we just made up to make you feel good.
Let me tell you a secret, George. Are you ready for this?
Go ahead.
So according to research, 9% of executive coaches in the United States are Black. Nice. Put a thumbnail there.
Okay.
That's not counting Black women. Okay. I mean, we're in that number. It doesn't parse us out. Okay. And it does not fragment credentialed coaches. So I'm essentially a unicorn on the loose right now.
Sure enough.
And you know what? I'm happy to be, because people like me who have this kind of training have been for a long time only accessible to the highest echelons of corporate America. I'm talking about the C-suite. So if we do the numbers, only 7% of C-suite executives in the Fortune 500 are women of color. That's everybody. That's Black and brown. So do you know that there are only 2 at the helm that are Black women?
All right, so we got some work to do. So the book is out all over the world this week. And as I was thinking about this conversation with you and this notion of being entitled, and so I wonder about that feeling. And what came up for me was this idea of imposter syndrome, right? Where I don't think I'm ready for it, or I know I'm ready, but I'm not sure I really belong. How much of that plays a role in this idea of whether someone feels entitled, women in particular, to the C-suite?
That's a wonderful question. And it's interesting because as Black women and women of color, sometimes this is compounded. It isn't just imposter syndrome. In fact, on our way to the C-suite, as we sojourn just in working in our careers, whether we're aiming for the C-suite or not, we come into spaces and rooms where we're not expected to lead. Okay. So there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out last year in 2022 that said something that I had felt in my gut. And it's the reason why the last time I spoke to you, we talked about no thanks,
That's
which is
right.
a precursor to yes, please. No thanks, 7 ways to say, I'll just include myself. I did not use the words imposter syndrome in that book for a very specific reason. And that is because if you go into a space and people already don't expect you to be there, do you know what negative emotion is transferred onto us without our permission? It's just in the room. And we sometimes adopt that, come out of those spaces and ask ourselves, am I really ready? Should I really be doing this? Because something in the room, whether it was spoken or not, led you to believe that you didn't fit.
Go ahead.
It's compounded. Now, when you get into spaces and you start to go on that rise and you start to be even more isolated than you were before, because remember, the numbers start to thin when you get to that middle of that pipeline. You get to director, senior director, you start to see the numbers fall off for Black women, just fall off. Then you get to VP, SVP. By the time you get on that corporate jet, George, it's you. And believe me, it doesn't get easier. It gets harder. So yes, you start to wonder, am I really ready for this? Because you're by yourself. And that's the villain in the book, isolation.
Isolation. And also, as I'm hearing you saying, what I hear from some of the sisters that I am contemporary with in leadership, this idea of respect, right?
Yes.
What you say, and often like this idea that you can say it, and then your colleague says it, and then that's when, oh yeah, that's a great idea. This idea,
Oh, yeah.
validation.
We call that white splaining or mansplaining. It was in
Right.
the remix, the other
Right,
book.
right.
Yeah, and that can make you feel isolated too, because suddenly you need to have someone validate what you said when what you said was absolutely right. They find ways to put you on an island, but you know what? That's the most obvious isolation.
Sure.
We talk about some other isolation that we
talk to
haven't
me.
really thought about.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the secrets in the book is around you have to move up and out to move up.
Go ahead.
Whether you move from company to company, whether you move from city to city, state to state, country to country, the fastest way to make it up that ladder, and the most successful way to do it, is to move. Now, if you're moving, like Dr. Keisha Kelly, who's in my book, happens to be my soror. She was my college roommate, but she's a chief nursing officer.
Right.
She's senior vice president and chief nursing officer.
And by the way, go ahead and claim your sorority, please. So
yes, Alpha Kappa Alpha. You see
thank
the green?
you. All right.
You see the green on the book?
I see you.
There you go. That's a shout out, a little subtle shout out to my sorors. But Keisha, Dr. Kelly, moved a total of 10 times to get where she wanted to go. And 2 of those times were Hawaii. So I guess one of those doesn't count because it's a nice place to be. But each time she moved, George, she had to establish a new community. And it gets tiring. And sometimes it's not that easy. She's in Portland right now. What's Portland like for Black folks?
Right.
Right. At this point, she's made it where she wants to be. Her youngest finished our alma mater. He moved to Portland, got an engineering job as first, and she's so happy just to have her son around the corner and her husband at home. That's where she gets her positive emotion. And by the way, positive emotion is the hero in the book.
Yeah, I wondered about that. L. Michelle Smith is the author of Yes, Please, I'm Entitled to the C-Suite. And these are strategies for women of color. And I was interested, you talked about Keisha, you did a lot of research. You talked to a lot of women executives. And in talking to them, you came up with your own strategy, obviously, as a coach to do, to give us, to impart this wisdom on us. And I was wondering just how you went about researching for this book.
Okay. So my process is kind of the same. It went the same for No Thanks, although No Thanks is very different because No Thanks was a collaborative. It's not even collaborative. What's the word I'm looking for? It is several essays that I put together around one theme.
Right.
I written some of the essays for Black Enterprise, and it isn't written top to bottom. So this time I had the luxury to unleash the writer and allow her to unleash her process. So what I typically do is I find one question that I'm stuck on, that I know that I want to research and won't get bored researching because my passion is there for it. And my question was this, based in applied positive psychology, core to psychology is, if happy people are successful people, and Black women, are they happy? Are they not happy? Could this be why they aren't successful? That was my question. And I said, how am I going to go about finding this out? So in addition to quantitative research, and of course, that's where you can count the data one by one, like widgets. I did a survey. I do qualitative research, and that entails interviews. And as you know, I'm a coach, and core to my practice are Black women and women of color. I coach everybody, but that sweet spot, they all come to me because they know that I've walked in their shoes and I've applied the science to what we're talking about. That was the opportunity and continues to be the opportunity, even when I'm not digging, to find out what's really going on in these companies. It's amazing what I can learn about what's going on inside a company by the conversations that I have outside. Then the other thing is I'm speaking all across the country. And after I speak, it's not over after you get off that platform. People come up to you afterwards and they start to share their stories. And this is what I found. No matter what the person looked like, what their name was, how tall they were, how short they were, what company they worked for, they all had similar stories. And that really was a driver for no thanks. And it's the engine for yes, please. These women are telling the same stories. So the fact that you're sitting there isolated, wondering if it's just you, and you also have a culture that tells you, assume the positive, assume good intent, when deep down inside you knew that didn't feel good.
Yeah.
This is an affirmation to know, oh, it's real, honey, because it's happening to all of us.
And so what then, well, there's a couple of things that come up because you do have some points that you make in the book, and I'm going to get to some of them. One of the things I want to know is, what is the current mindset that holds many women of color back?
Oh, you know what? It's layered. And it's layered because of culture. I'm a student of culture. And when I say culture, I don't just mean the color of our skin.
Right.
I'm talking about the thing that makes your squad a squad. I'm talking about even your faith. I'm talking about generation over generation. I'm talking about gender. There are micro cultures and there are macro cultures. So let's get underneath this, okay?
Let's go.
Let's first start with generation.
All right.
Now, I specialize with mid-career, middle age, Gen X. The boomers have kind of gone on. They've retired, they're on. In fact, those are my parents, okay? I am the target, okay? And then you have these women who have run up against some of the same things just because they're in that category, okay? So we watched our parents, like most people have, okay? And understanding that we're educated, there's a reason why we got there and we're all in the same place. We're well credentialed. We may be first generation corporate. In fact, most of us are. I have one millennial in the book, and she's the first one that had a corporate mom who she can lean in on. So that's another form of the isolation. But we saw something different. Our boomer parents were just trying to survive.
Sure.
They were trying for access. And so we're trying to live out our parents' lives in a very different context. We've got digital age is crazy. I mean, can we talk about AI for a second?
Come on.
We are seeing technology, and it's the great equalizer. Even these phones that we have, I talked about this a lot when I was working at the big company. Those phones bridged the digital divide for so many people. You didn't have to have a full-on desktop computer to apply for a job suddenly. You could do it on your device. You could afford a phone. You were connected. You could do these things. We have more opportunities. And while we're still fighting for access, it's not nearly as much as our parents. But we tend to try to live out what is modeled in front of us. Now, that old black tax, we've been told, honey, you got to be 10 times as good to be in that room,
Sure.
to even get invited to the room. Now, these are women that are high performing. They've been to the leadership trainings because somebody has tapped them and said she's excellent. They're no longer looking at your capabilities at that point. And that's something that we don't understand. We think that we're supposed to be workhorses all the way up to the C-suite. And that will get us in trouble because we're not delegating. We're not being strategic. We're not being tactical. We have to be able to let go of some of these cultural things that are holding us back. Now, wrapped in there is race.
Okay.
It's
I mean,
not
of course
just that
it
our
is.
parents, it's not just that our parents lived in a different age and they knew that if you kept your head down, you did good work, that maybe somebody would tap you on the shoulder. They didn't merchandise work. We came up with that word in our generation, merchandise your work. That was showboating to them. This false sense of humility that we carry into these very corporate and capitalistic environments. And we see Susie and Chad merchandising their work,
Right.
rubbing shoulders with people and telling them, this is what I accomplished. And they're getting elevated. And we're sitting there waiting for someone to tap us on the shoulder. Or we figure if we work hard, someone will see us. When you need to work smarter, and you probably don't need to work as hard. So we have to reverse all this old black tax stuff once we make it to the point where they're considering likability instead of capability, because that's already established. And that white man, and you sit with him in the office, and it happened to me too, starts asking you about your family and how's your daughter? And you mentioned your dad plays table tennis. Tell me more about that. You know what we've been taught culturally as Black folks? Don't you
Can't
tell
trust
all
them.
that to that white man.
That's right. Trust.
And what do? We lock it down. We don't talk
Yeah.
about it.
I
And
want to
there are
pick up on.
opportunities there.
I want to pick up on that because trust is a big piece, and you write about that in your book. And I wonder, is there really such a thing? I mean, how do you know? Because many of us feel that we've been burned, right? Putting our trust, right? And so how do you know for real who to confide in, who to trust in, especially when that isolation thing picks up? What do you write about that? And how did you overcome that in your own experience?
What an insightful question. And it gets to the core of the book here. This matter of trust really cuts into the idea of isolation. If you don't know who to trust, then you're alone. You're on an island. It's a mental gymnastics. You have to be the Simone Biles, I say in the book. The Simone Biles of mental gymnastics to figure out what you should do. Now, one thing is key: time. It takes time. You have to watch people, watch them closely, but you also have to not let the burden of resilience, which is a term that I use in the book, stand in the way of your next opportunity. What do I mean by that? I talked to a professional psychologist, industrial psychologist in the book. Her name is Carrie Sullivan. They're able to tell whether a company will fail or prosper based on the chatter that they see outside of the company, whether it's online, whether it's in the news, whatever's going on. They can pick out the growth and the fixed mindsets and who's in charge. And if they find that there are fixed mindsets in charge, too many of them in charge with growth mindsets reporting to them, it's a recipe for disaster. She gets into that. But guess what she told me? She told me that the growth mindset is most often earned through trauma and adversity. Sit with that. Now, on the one hand, that should make you want to shout. Yeah, that should make you want to shout. And she put the caveat: if you allow yourself to learn from it, which is something that we covered in No Thanks. So listen, if you allow your trauma, your past traumas, because you know they're real, and your adversity to teach you some things, you can be that transformational leader. You can do amazing things. This is the part that should make you shout. We are uniquely constructed, nature and nurture, to be transformational leaders because, honey, we've got the trauma. Okay.
Already.
But
That's
here's the
built
thing
in.
about the burden of resilience. It's a burden because where does resilience come from? Trauma. Do we heal from it like we should?
Not
A lot of
always.
times, no.
Yeah.
Because you know what we do with forgiveness? Just like the word love. Love is one of those positive emotions. There are 10, by the way, that we can lean into to get us to be more successful in these challenging environments. But forgiveness is one of those words we don't use around corporate America, but I'm pushing for it. And the reason is because if you come from the church like I do, you've been taught forgiveness isn't all about them. It's all about you. It's not letting them off the hook. How often have we applied that to our personal lives? We've even forgiven our exes, released them into the wild, and forgiven them and felt the freedom. But we have not taken the intentional time to walk down the list of individuals and entities that have undone us before we go on to the next opportunity. But guess what that does?
What does it do?
You carry that trauma right into that new situation. Let's look at relationships. Works the exact same way. If you have not healed from your last relationship, guess what you're taking into the new one?
That same stuff. And I guess we call that baggage. So speaking of relationships, let me pivot to, and you can wrap that in if you haven't really fully dealt with the trust thing. What's love got to do with it?
Oh, love got everything to do with it.
Right. And I'm
so glad you asked.
Okay. What's
love
God
got to do with it? God resting a soul.
Come on now. What's love got to do with it? Especially because one of the things you talk about is that who you with, outside of you talking about relationships within the company, but your partnership outside is going to also be critical. So I ask you, what's love got to do with it?
Love's got everything to do with it. And the minute we begin to understand that early, and for many of us, I'm one of them. I'm mid-career, I'm middle-aged, I'm 51 years old. I'm just realizing that if I had been as intentional as most men are, considering their career and what kind of mate I actually need in order to do that kind of career, I'd be a happy woman today in that department.
Right. Like who do I need to be in partnership with for us to rise together?
Yeah.
For me to rise. It's funny because there's also that tension of my thing might be off the hook right now and yours might not be. Who am I in that relationship, and how do I deal with the fact that it may not? Can you accept that I'm going up? Can I accept that you are right here? And does that work for us and so I go back to what's love got to do with it?
So I actually, in chapter 8, I identify the unicorns. I call them unicorns. These are the men that seem to have a better time with high-performing women, and they have certain traits. There is a story in the book, Amazing Woman. And what I do with this story is take you all the way outside what you expect to bring you back to where most people are going to operate. Her name is Ann Chow. She's an Asian American woman. She used to be the CEO of one of the biggest business units at AT&T. Truth be told, everybody knows it's where I worked before, okay? That's where I met Ann. Ann was heralded because she was the first woman of color to take on a helm like that at a Fortune 10. You can see and Google her. She is all over the place because this had never happened before. And of course, everybody wanted to know why. Since I was in charge of CorpCom during the time that she was on her ascension, there were several stories written about Ann that I had a lot to do with. One of the points that I learned about her was she's a classically trained pianist, went to Juilliard. But the other thing that I found out about her was she has this husband named Bob who retired early, and he stayed home with the kids. 2 girls, to be exact. Now, I didn't know the whole story until I called her up and I said, Ann, there's this book I'm writing, and I think you'd be perfect for chapter 8. Would you tell me more about your story? And she said, certainly. She told me that they took the time before they were married, when they were dating to talk about what his aspirations were, what her aspirations were. And let's stop for a second. So often we are so tied into roles.
Sure.
And when I say roles, I don't want to go as deep as to gender roles, but I'm talking about traditional roles. Because again, this is cultural. We look back, we see our parents. If we came up in a 2-parent home, we might have saw a certain way, right? We saw a certain way. I'll tell you what I saw.
Right.
And it's in the book too. I saw my mom, a school teacher, put together 3 square meals, clean the house top to bottom, making sure my dad had everything he needed. And that was the model that I had. Now, when I became an independent woman and I hadn't gotten married yet, I was 26 before I got married. And I was traveling all over the place, had a high octane job. We had beepers in. People were beeping me, all of this good stuff. I decided then that I wanted to come home to a clean house. I liked the smell of pine salt when I got home. It freed my mind because I knew I didn't have that to focus on. And I also decided that I would have my groceries delivered. This is back in the early 2000s.
Back in the day, right?
Back in the day. This is before Instacart.
Right.
Way before. So it was considered, that may be, a little something extra. I was on my own. But when I married, later on, I came up across some of the most, they didn't want to have it. They didn't want to have an extra person in the house cleaning the house every other week. And I didn't understand it, especially at 9 months pregnant. That's a whole other story. But getting back to Ann. Ann discussed all of this with her partner before they got married. Who would take care of the kids? One thing that they level set on was that they didn't want to outsource that part. They wanted one of the parents to be the parent at home. So what they planned for him to do was for him to work until he could retire. And, as much as he got shade from people, can you imagine?
Right.
He got shade. This man was sharp enough and smart enough to retire at 39. Now, who can do that?
Right.
Who can do that? It wasn't that he just walked away from his job. This man still had retirement income coming in. And guess what? She knew her baby girls were safe every time she got on a plane. And she will tell you that he had the hard job. She didn't have the hard job. You got to read the book to see how the friends responded, because the friends, gave them grief.
So thinking about then what to empower the viewers, the readers, because I love these stories. You believe, so you talked about positive psychology. Do I have that right? And neuroscience. You believe that a positive mindset, relationship partners, mentoring. I didn't get to that question. Let me ask that about how difficult it is to find mentors when you're the one of the only, or the onlys of one, and being able to trust that other one. And
oh, that's key.
Talk to me.
That's key. Oh my goodness. We talk more about sponsors and mentors in here, but the same holds true.
Okay.
And you're right. It's a numbers game.
Yeah.
As you go up the chain, fewer and fewer of us. We've been taught can't be it unless you can see it.
Right.
Well, heck, we can't see it. And the ones that we do see, can they sponsor everybody? No, they can't. And by the way, they're fighting their own battles.
Sure.
If you look at the results of the survey that I did, there are 2 questions that are very much linked, but very different. One asks, who was the most helpful to you? Who is the most helpful to you on your leadership ascension, on your aspirations and your journey to the C-suite? And the other question, of course, the answer was by gender and race. And we talked a little bit about this, and no thanks, because I revealed who was on the harmful list, the top of the harmful list. But there's a harmful question. Who was the most harmful to you?
Yeah.
By race and by gender. Can I tell you a secret?
Talk to me.
There's only one group that wasn't on both lists.
Who?
Black men.
Really?
Black men, 11% of the women who responded said that they were the most helpful. They were at the bottom of the list, but they made the list for most helpful. They did not appear on the most harmful list.
Mm.
Now, let me get to the nitty gritty insight. This is the secret. Everybody else was on both lists.
Interesting.
So who do you trust? And that leads you to believe that there are some people who look like me who've made it to positions who may show up as a sponsor or a mentor in your life. And whether it's intentional or not, you may not get what you expect out of that sponsor.
I know there's a whole bunch of stories right there.
Yes.
All
And we
right.
call it sponsorship impotency.
Mm.
And we run into it a lot. People are still talking about, oh, it's hard to get a sponsor. Yeah, that's the chitter chatter out there. But that's so 2017. We know that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the efficacy of these sponsors. Are they doing their jobs? And who are they?
All right. So let me ask this, and let me wrap here and say, how then do we say to women of color and Black women in particular, I'm saying Black women in particular, how do we know that we are entitled?
That's a good question.
Right? Because, and how do we move beyond, because it's not just a positive mindset. That's not enough. It's not as simple as don't worry, be happy.
Yes.
So how do we take in this book, right? How do we know as women of color that we are entitled, that they are entitled to the C-suite? What is the nuggets you're going to leave with them?
And we started laying that groundwork in No Thanks. So if you haven't read it, it's not that you can't pick up Yes Please and pick up and run, because you can. But there are some alignment that happens in that first book. And one of the things that's core to that book, the hero in the book is knowing your value. Yeah. You have got to know your value. You've got to know yourself well enough, your intrinsic value, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made simply because you exist. Okay? But then you need to know your market value and your extrinsic value, those talents and gifts that you bring to the table. We have to be able to recognize those. And for some of us, that's very, very hard. I talked about this with another journalist just a couple of days ago. The fact that we have this false sense of humility. I run into this with a lot of my clients where I'll say, what did you accomplish this week? And they have to think. And when they start to think about it, they start rattling off this list. What would it take for you to jot these things down at the end of the week, every week, as your own personal gratitude journal, to show that you've done these things, that you're grateful, that you have gratitude for these things? You know what they say to me?
What do they say?
I don't want to be boastful. And I'm like, sis, who's listening while you're writing in that journal? What is going on? Like, who's going to hear you do that but you? How is that boastful? You need another party for it to be boastful. And then I asked them, the last time you got an award and you really killed it, what did you say when somebody said thank you to you? And you know what many of them say? I say, you know what? It was by the grace of God. So are you even a braggadocious person? You're not. By your track record, you are humble. But what you have to do is acknowledge your excellence. And we're afraid to do it. But those ladies who are willing and able can begin to consider their entitlement. Because guess what? When you're in the margins and you're not privileged, and you've been working 10 times as hard to get to that excellent place where people actually recognize it, you know that you're entitled, and it's not entitlement. Okay? When privileged people who already have entitlements because they really don't even deserve it, they just showed up in the room. And then on top of that, demand things. That's the kind of entitlement that we don't want any part of. But guess what? It's good medicine for us, kind of like the doses of white privilege that we took in No Thanks, the dose of self-love that they come with, right? That we don't come with. Maybe we have the pride in ourselves and our community, but we walk into that environment where we're othered and it all goes out the window.
Yes.
We know we're entitled because we know we're excellent.
Yes, please. Yes,
Yes,
please.
please.
I got, before I say the title of the book, I already have the next title of your next book.
Oh, really?
You ready?
Give it
So
to me.
you got no thanks.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. You know what? I thought about a third one and it would be yellow, like the yellow light.
Yes,
And
yes.
maybe it'd be hold up.
Hold up. Okay. All right.
But I think I'm finished with this series. I have
You-
another one in the hopper that I won't talk about, but there is a survey that folks can take. In fact, could you put it in your show notes? Because I would really
can.
like to see. I'm doing research right now. Okay.
So send me the link and we'll put it in the show notes. It'll be
Absolutely.
right there for people. And the name of the book is Yes, Please, 7 Ways to Say I'm Entitled to the C-Suite, Secrets Women of Color Need to Know Now to Find Their Happy and Thrive in an Exclusive Corporate Culture. The book is available everywhere. Just released. L. Michelle Smith is the author. Great friend of the program. Such a joy to chat with her and to get these stories and these secrets. And your life will be changed. I heard a few things in there that I'm gonna put on my list. I'm gonna tell you that right now.
Oh, and you know what? I'm glad you said it. And I know you got to go. But George, my premise is still the same. Solve for the double disadvantage, solve for everybody.
That's right.
So yes, you pick it up as an ally. You will become a better ally, but you pick it up and you'll also become a better leader.
There you go.
It's for everybody.
L. Michelle Smith, thank you so much. People we feel good about here on Inspiration for the Nation. The book available everywhere. Books are sold. L. Michelle, we thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
insights. And we wish you good luck with the book,
Thank you.
Inspiration for the Nation.